Greetings all, this is Ehav Ever from the Chronicles of Ehav Ever, and just in case you're wondering, you've probably seen a number of videos that I do where I'm actually in my car. Um I'm hoping not to make this like a regular thing where I'm like doing videos in my car, but it seems like it's the only time that I really have time to sit down and be able to do anything, since I work a lot and since I train in martial arts a lot, as well as train, a couple kids in martial arts a lot. Is for a long time I've been debating about doing a video about my involvement in Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated. I was thinking about talking about why I joined it, what went on when I was a part of it, and then why I eventually left it. Um, in order to understand why I haven't done a video about it yet, and why I've mainly just written about it on my blog, you have to understand that there are issues in terms of fraternity life, black fraternity life in particular, that are considered to be of extremely secretive nature, regardless of whether they're really like secrets or not. And the line between supposedly what's a secret and what's just something that people think is a secret sometimes is a line that's it's hard to sometimes define for people, because some people have not really seen, or have not had it really defined for them over what information is just information and what information is actually secret information. I attended Peruvian University, and I had always known that I wanted to join a fraternity. But initially, Phi Beta Sigma was not my first choice. Partially because there wasn't a lot of Phi Beta Sigma activity in Kansas City that I had seen, as well as the fact that at Prairie at the time when I was there, Phi Beta Sigma initially was not very strong, as a fraternity. What eventually it turned me to Sigma was I had a roommate named Marks Thompson, who had pledged at I think Wiley College, where actually my father went to college for a few years at Wiley, where he graduated I think with his bachelor's from there. And Marks was like a real good guy. He wasn't like really one of the flamboyant types. He was a computer science major, and just his attitude about life, as well as when he first got to the campus, he had some issues with the Sigmas that were there, because they were of a different type than he was used to. And he initially just like thought about like taking all of his Sigma paraphernalia, like shirts, hats, and just sending it back home and not really being active in Phi Beta Sigma. He was convinced to do otherwise by an older member of the fraternity who worked on campus, and he eventually became president of the fraternity. In fall '95, I think it was, or I think it was spring '95 actually, Phi Beta Sigma had a line, and this is at the Prairie View, at the Delta Theta chapter of Phi Beta Sigma. And I thought about like going off of that line, but at the time I just didn't know enough about Phi Beta Sigma, and I just kind of decided not to do it. It would be I think like fall '96, or like later on, or spring '96 actually, when I really thought about doing it, but I didn't get it picked up for that line. Fall '96 I got picked up for the line, and it was during that semester I pledged Sigma. Okay, so a number of years pass. I go from living in Texas to living in California. Being a member of Sigma in California was difficult for me personally, because I was used to there being more Sigma activity going on, and wanting to be a part of more Sigma activity, which initially was like I wanted to move to the East Coast. I wanted to move to Washington, D.C., where the Phi Beta Sigma headquarters is. So when I was in California, other things in my life started to change a little bit. I started to become a little bit more aware in terms of where I wanted to be in terms of my Jewishness. At the time it was kind of just like a little spark, but it was something that was starting to kind of grow in my life, that I felt that the reality of who I was becoming was based upon something in terms of where my family came from and who we used to be. And this was starting to happen in California, and when I eventually moved to New York, or New Jersey initially, it became something a little bit more intense, and then as time started going on, when I moved to New York, I came to a crossroads where I couldn't be involved in Phi Beta Sigma anymore and still be a religious Jew. One of the first problems I had at one point when I lived in New Jersey actually was that I was a part of the New York chapter in Brooklyn, Kappa Beta Sigma, and they had chapter meetings on Saturday afternoons, or Saturday nights actually, and it was difficult for me to like drive there, especially I'm trying to observe the Shabbat, observe the Sabbath, be Shomer Shabbat, bit by bit I was becoming this, And, it was like, well, wait a minute, we have a meeting like at night, so maybe I can just kind of stop being, doing the Shabbat, doing the Sabbath early, and then like run to this fraternity meeting, and kind of like see everybody, blah, blah, blah. So I did that for a little while, but the more I did it, the more guilty I felt. Especially I remember once driving through a religious Jewish neighborhood, and seeing everybody going to the synagogue, and I felt like really guilty, even though they would have never, at the time I wasn't wearing, kippah, so, head covering like this, so nobody would have ever known, by just looking like, oh, hey, what's that guy, he's Jewish, he's like driving around, but I felt guilty. I remember the day that I made the decision that I was going to get more religious and walk away from Sigma. When that day took place, it was basically a situation, it was like a real hard decision for me to do, because up until that point, Phi Beta Sigma was like everything for me. It was like everything that my life was revolving around. But then all of a sudden I got to this point where it was like, I can't do this anymore, and it also, I also linked some of this back to a situation where I was doing a lot of writing in the fraternity, and at the time I was writing things that were a part of my religious struggle to try to find myself. And it was coming out in a lot of my writings, that I was doing for the fraternity. And it came to a head when one day someone sent me an email asking me if Phi Beta Sigma was a religion. And I'm thinking like, why would somebody think it's a religion? What are they, crazy? It's just a, organization. But then, I looked back and read some of the stuff that I wrote, and it was like, oh man, wait a minute. I'm writing like some really almost like religious doctrine kind of stuff, I've always, even after I, stopped being a member of Sigma, I still have the highest respect for the fraternity, and it's really the only black fraternity I ever would have joined, no matter what. Really enjoyed joining. Sigma was part of the reason that I actually returned to Judaism. Especially, I was able to interview one of the first non-African American members of Phi Beta Sigma that we knew of. His name was Dr. George Eggers, and he was an Ashkenazi Jew who had escaped the Holocaust. And we had to talk about a number of different things, and things that he said, really made me consider, that I needed to do something different with my life than I was doing at the time. As well as, there's another incident that's hard to talk about without actually showing it, that, made me consider, returning to Judaism. But it was all, some of it was partially because of my interaction with Sigma and just different things that came up. It's still, my belief that Phi Beta Sigma, for me, was like the best black fraternity out there. And I really felt that it had really noble startings, and really, it's one of those things where even to this day when I look, just look up to see how the things that fraternity's doing, I really am, was glad to have joined it, and I really learned a lot from a number of people who were part of it.